I'm okay, thank you. That
It's Deborah.
October.
No, it's me now. Hi.
Hi. Let's just see if a couple of more people join. Otherwise, we'll just jump in. I'll just give them another minute or two. But in the meantime, have you guys started preparing for the exams? How are you feeling? Are you confident about this subject? Is this a sure A symbol for you? Difficult question. Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to start. So, good evening, ladies. Thank you for joining. I think tonight is tonight is definitely going to be the last time that we are going to meet this way for this year. Since we are going to go and run through the final 2 learning units, which is learning unit 13, that is about factors affecting assessment results. And there's just one slide that I want to talk to in terms of that particular learning unit. And then there's learning unit 14, pardon me, that is about the future of psychological assessment. So those are the 2 things we're going to talk about tonight. And that is also going to conclude the facilitation sessions for this year. And before we start, it's really just to wish you everything of the best in the exams. I hope these sessions have facilitated some further in-depth understanding about the subject matter, psychometric assessments in the workplace, and what are the things that you need to look out for, what's the ethics around it, what's the qualification framework, what's the do's and the don'ts, and assist somebody that comes for an assessment, the things to look out for, etc. So I really hope that you're going to do very well in your exams. So I am going to ask you to firstly, if you could write your student number in the chat, because UNISA uses that as attendance register, just your student number in the chat. And then I am going to share my screen. Let me just switch that off. And let's see. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, great. So like I said, Unit 13 is really around the factors affecting assessment results. And this schematic diagram that we have in front of us comes directly out of your chapter 17 of your textbook. So what are the factors that affects assessment? As an industrial organizational psychologist, what are those things that you need to be aware of? And how does that impact assessment results at the end of the day? Because when you do an assessment, you get a score. You are interested in a score that you get from an assessment instrument, because that really infers. I'm on the left-hand side in the green area. That's where I'm starting. It infers, or it is a direct measure of a candidate's strengths and ability. But like we said last week, a test score is only one piece of information about how a person performs. And assessment results need to be looked at in a multitude of contexts in order for that assessment result to be given over either to the test taker or the manager or the organization. Important thing to remember. It is but one element of an assessment strategy of which a competency-based interview is always part of it, and it could have other things like a role play, etc. So it cannot be seen in isolation. Psychological assessment is also based on the principle that people have an inherent ability and characteristics that can be measured. Now, do you believe that? Don't you believe that? Yes, it seems that there's an inference that can be derived from going through somebody's assessment reports. And we must just remember that the principle needs to be tested. So the textbook refers to age-related changes. Measures are developed for certain age groups based on skills and interest characteristics of a particular age group. And that is correct, because that is a factor that would affect assessment results. If the assessment battery that you are using, if that instrument is not geared at the right level in terms of age perspective, you're obviously going to get very skewed results in that sense. So age appropriateness also needs to come into play depending on what the issue is that you're trying to address. So if you design an instrument, for instance, and the context is a school, can you have one instrument that you send to teachers? Can you send the same instrument to learners in the school? So that's the questions that you need to ask yourself, because those kind of things is what will impact the assessment result and how you analyze and interpret that result. Do in our strategic process for people with physical impairment, where measures need to be adapted for people with disabilities to get a true level of functioning. One needs to get a medical history before starting. And sometimes these kind of disabilities, as defined by the Employment Equity Act, are non-observable. I mean, it's easy to see somebody doesn't have a leg or is missing an arm or is in a wheelchair. Those are very obvious signs and indications. But sometimes, you know, the less obvious ones, that is not, you can't see these disabilities, like a brain injury. You know, somebody that suffered through cerebral malaria, because that's going to impact your thinking ability. Somebody who has meningitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, those kind of things. Those are considerations that needs to be considered, because it does impact assessment results. But again, I want to say, reasonable accommodation, what does that mean? Your context will say, what does that mean for people with disability? But overarching all of that is the inherent requirements of the job, if it is a recruitment assessment that you are undertaking. But you could have assessments in many other fields. That's not just for selection purposes. The biological context. The lowest level, which refers to the bodily structures and functions which affect behavior. I'm sorry, this didn't go off. Now I see in your unit handout that they've given you, they do put emphasis on, they talk about this particular diagram, that they put emphasis on the biological context, the intrapsychic context, and the social context. So what is the biological context? So that could be how you feel physically on the day, because intrapsychic context means it comprises of emotions, abilities, and personal disposition. And biological and intrapsychic processes are regarded as interdependent components of the individual as a psychological entity. Basically, what that says is the way you feel on the day that you take the test is going to impact the assessment result. And it is important for an industrial organizational psychologist to check in with a person in terms of how did you feel on the day when it is debrief time? How did you feel on the day that you took the assessment? Were you well? What was the circumstances around your health and mental state on the day? Because that could be why somebody was not able to do their best. And you kind of need to give people allowance for not having been feeling great on that day, either from a biological nature, so there could be some pains and aches and ailments, or from a intrapsychic context where it is about your emotions. You know, something could have gone wrong on that day. Somebody could have died on that day that is close to you, but now you need to go take an assessment and you think to yourself, this assessment is important, I'm going to sit for it, but that is going to impact your performance on the day. And some of the things is those transient conditions. I'm on the far right-hand side of the page. And those are the everyday events that unexpectedly happen and upsets you. You could be in a car accident on your way to the assessment center. And you think you're okay, but actually that is impacting your performance. Psychopathology impairs the performance of cognitive negative effects like anorexia, bulimia, depression, causes problems in memory and psychomotor slowing and cognitive skills. So you can see that if you had a depressive episode on that day or any other mental health issues, it will impact your performance. And the psychologist needs to be aware that that was the context on the day when you took the test, and factor that into how they interpret the results. Then there's also a social context to keep in mind. So aspect of the environment that the test taker is living in. The home, the community they are part of, their people interactions, their work experiences, their cultural and socio-political considerations. Those are all things to consider. Schooling. Where did the person undergo formal education? Did that education provide them with problem-solving skills, cognitive skills, and the knowledge they need to acquire information and deal with problems? So problem-solving, cognitive ability, is the schooling environment that the test taker was exposed to sufficiently able to deliver those kind of skills and abilities? Language. The most important single moderator of performance on assessment measures. Why? Because the language that is being used is mostly English. when you live in a multicultural, multilingual society, it is going to be an issue when a second, a third, a fourth mother tongue speaker needs to understand instructions that's normally part of a psychological assessment. So language is a big problem. Did the candidate actually understand what they needed to do? Culture. Sociocultural factors may affect manifestations of underlying cognitive and emotional processes. It is unlikely that cultural differences exist in the basic component of cognitive processes. And I like that because I would refuse to think that that is the case. Environmental factors. The socioeconomic status, the social environment that the test taker feel that they come from would impact. Proximal factors, you know, the immediate environment, proximal, close to you, socialization within the family and the home. Because when you look at personality, I think when you were a first-year student, we did define personality as being the sum total of your environment, your socialization, your family dynamics, and the wider environment, socioeconomic climate that a person grows up into. And that will also, again, impact on how you take an assessment, how comfortable you are, how the language impacts, how the personality impacts. Yeah. So from a test administrator point of view, there's also a couple of things that needs to be considered. Test administration and standardized procedures, flexibility and minor adjustment, especially with children, physical and mental disabilities, or people with brain injuries. So that just says, once again, the test administrator in how they need to conduct themselves in these different circumstances. You can't just take one paintbrush and all test takers are the same. You have to be aware of those differences and cater to those differences as much as possible, because you want the person to be comfortable, you want to put them at ease, because the minute you take away the anxiety, then people are better able to think and open their brains in terms of responses. Influence of the assessment practitioner. It goes without saying that the practitioner should be prepared. It shouldn't be a mechanical process. You need to establish rapport with the test taker. Assessment practitioners need to be familiar with the procedure and at ease with the situation, so that there is no hesitation when asked to please explain certain things within the instructions, because that is the worst thing, that your administrator can't even help you to understand how to approach what does certain things mean within a test situation. So those are some of the factors affecting assessment results. It's in your book in chapter 17. And this is really all I want to say in terms of learning unit 13. And I want to go over to learning unit 14 now, which really speaks to the future of psychological assessment. And I think we've already established that there is a couple of challenges, especially in the South African context, when you look at norm groups, when you look at validity of instruments and reliability of instruments. So let's look a little bit into the future and see what are some of those factors, what the future of psychological assessment holds. Can you see my PowerPoint slides?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So part of learning unit 14 also talks about what are the advantages and the disadvantages of online assessment, because as we said about a week and 2 weeks ago, assessment has moved away quite substantially from the pencil and paper test to mostly being digital, online. And I think one of the advances in psychometric assessment is to really make it mobile. Because right now you have to do desktop or laptop in terms of how it is formatted, but a lot of organizations have already started the process of the mobile, because the way you build a test is very different across a kind of desktop versus a mobile phone or a tablet. It's a very different way of setting it up. So let's look at some of the advantages of online assessment. Online assessment saves companies a lot of time and money. And the reason for that is that you don't need to provide infrastructure for running assessments. So generally, an assessment, a psychometric practice would have a lab. There would be a lab. In the lab, you would have cubicles set up. You would have a desktop at each cubicle. There would be an internet connection linked to each of those workstations, if you like. And you need somebody that needs to administer the test. So it is observed test taking, right? So obviously, when you go online, you don't need any of that infrastructure unless you want to have a backup plan where a test taker tells you, I don't have data or I don't have internet. But we also know that there's lots and lots of internet cafes. There's lots of free data that's been given, whether you're in a mall or in a coffee shop. So that argument is actually less and less valid these days because you can access free data. And the city even has a couple of hotspots where you can just download your stuff, get free data, etc. So yes, online assessment does save companies a lot of time and money, infrastructure, and people cost of administering that infrastructure. Because what you do now with online assessment, you send a test taker a link. They open that link on their computer, they sit in their own home and they do the assessment. And once they submit that assessment, it immediately goes back to the recruiter and the recruiter sees the scores that the person have obtained. Often the assessment can be completed in less time because you're alone, you're sitting there, you focusing on this one thing only, and it does take less time. But it also takes less time in terms of people's travel to a specific venue to go do the assessment and then travel back home. So there's also a cost component there that comes out in terms of traveling to go take an assessment. When you have online assessment, I think the best part of it is you can have multiple candidates on the online assessment at the same time, and you are not limited by a lab in your company's offices that only has a capacity of 10 computers, because that means you can only assess 10 people in the time, say in a 3-hour session, depending on the assessment battery. So it's multiple candidates online. They can all log in on the same time, and you don't need a specialized person that manages that process. It's completely independent, and the test taker manages the administration themselves. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the cost of infrastructure, the devices, the internet connection, the desk space, because that is charged per square meter. The being connected to the internet, there's a monthly charge involved here. And online, they use their own devices, their own data. You have none of that overhead cost. So it saves time, it saves money, it saves traveling in and out to take an assessment, and it is just the future of assessments. Some of the disadvantages, there's not much that you can say about the disadvantages, because, you know, the advantages really outweighs any disadvantages that you might have. One of the things that has always come up is that people are not computer literate. But I want to debunk that, because every South African has 1 or 2 devices, mobile devices, that they own. And on those mobile devices, they are active on social media. And if you can click and get in and out of social media, then you can do an online assessment. It doesn't take word processing skills. It doesn't need the knowledge of Microsoft Office or Windows or anything like that. If you can navigate, click here, click there, click wherever, which is what you do on social media, you will be able, you have sufficient computer literacy to do an online test. The downfall, however, especially in South Africa, is that technology is not always reliable. And I don't mean the technology per se, but most technology, if it is a desktop, you need power. Now, if power goes off in your town at the time when you are scheduled to sit for an assessment, it's a problem. There might be internet connection problems. We know our internet service providers, they do go offline from time to time. There's a drop in transmission, you know. These things can happen with online assessments. And it's just one of those things that you need to manage, because we live in an ESCOM environment, and those are things that are out of our control. And I think for most people who now need to do work online, you need to get an inverter so that you still have power when you have to do online things, etc. Because that's also part of, besides COVID-19, our new normal is that our energy supply is not stable. So those are some of the disadvantages of online assessment. So what does the future of psychological assessment hold in this digital age we are entering? I think psychological assessment will just become more accessible thanks to the rapid adoption of new technologies. But I'm also now thinking, you know, people who are qualifying themselves to be psychometrists might be affected here, because a psychometrist typically would be the person that you see face to face when you go in for an assessment. So that role might potentially look very different in the next 3 to 5, 10 years from now as we go further into digitalization. And new technologies will also offer innovative breakthroughs in the way we assess people. Mobile technologies, including smart devices and tablets, are likely to replace PCs and laptops as the most common way of undertaking assessments. This presents some formidable challenges in terms of ensuring standardized test conditions. Now, you see, those are the kind of things that a psychometrist would have guarded over. You know, the test conditions are standardized. Everybody sat in a quiet room, zero disturbances, you know, nothing that takes their focus off doing the test, like people working outside with drills and things. And these are specifically important when it comes to the ability part of an assessment test. But disregarding all of that, you know, companies are moving ahead regardless to incorporate these cost-effective and candidate-friendly technologies into their testing process. Because you need to touch a candidate about 3 times. Does that mean currently that the person comes into your offices 3 times? Most of the time, yes. That's 6 trips per taxi or by other public transport modes or with your own car with the cost of petrol that it is today. Imagine you can turn that into technology solutions on those 3 times that the person needed to come into your physical brick and mortar offices now. Your candidate experience is just going to be so much better than what it is at the moment. Your recruiter experience are also going to be more positive in doing it this way. Virtual reality hiring and high-tech simulations will extend the psychological assessment toolkit. Traditional surveys are giving way to new, more engaging ways of collecting and analyzing data. Many of these shifts the focus from proxies of behavior, for instance, completing a survey, to measuring actual behavior. Because how do you do a typical role play in a digital context? You know, what does that look like? So is there still place for role plays in the future where everything is going to be digital? What other creative solutions does industrial organizational psychologists need to come up with that will still measure what they need to measure, but on a digital platform? And there's a lot of companies that are introducing virtual reality hiring and high-tech simulations. Now, guys, I have been in the human resource industry for many, many years. I remember having to recruit for somebody. Then I physically needed to travel Cape Town to East London. I need to get up 4 o'clock in the morning. I need to get on a 6 o'clock, the red eye to East London, get to the offices at 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock, the interview is set up face to face. It is my time, the HR person. It is the hiring line manager's time. It is the candidate's time. It's the person that normally scribes for the interview kind of thing. It's their time. So then next week, you need to go and you need to do the same thing, and you need to go to Durban to do the same thing there. Whereas now we use things like MS Teams, we use Zoom, nobody needs to travel. You sit in your office, everybody logs onto their technology solution, and you can have a virtual face-to-face. Yeah, so that's all I need to say there about virtual reality. Artificial intelligence will minimize subjectivity in assessing psychological assessment test. Now you ask yourself the question, is this possible? Can you have an algorithm that looks through how somebody responded on an assessment test and then makes inferences without a human with a knowledge of industrial and organizational psychology interpreting those scores? Can an algorithm actually do this? And computer-based artificial intelligence is introduced by some companies already, specifically to help minimize the subjectivity in decision-making, especially when collecting and analyzing interview data. Because the AI doesn't care what the person looked like that you saw, doesn't care to their background or that they are also an alumni of your university. None of that. It is just taking the scores and it is giving a report at the end of the day because of some criteria that was built into it. So it's an interesting departure point. And with a growing number of technology companies offering smart interview recording and analysis technologies, including video screening via laptops and smart devices, this is a trend we predict will grow significantly. And let me tell you, it is already in startup. Just before I left my old job, we were testing a process where we could do digital interviews, which means that you send the person a link. The person sits in front of a screen. It is being recorded, and the AI asks the questions. So there's no person involved. The AI asks the question, and the person responds into the computer, which is video recorded, their responses. And a recruiter will then go in at some time, go download that interview, and will then sit and score this person based on that. So you don't need to shuffle people's diaries to get to a good time where everybody is available to sit on this recruitment panel to interview somebody, as an example. It all happens enabled by artificial intelligence and the digital age that we are in at the moment. So that's quite exciting developments that's happening in the assessment space from a selection perspective. So user experience will be very important to measure in this digital world because it is going to be impacted by the design of the psychological assessment test. Because the way you design the test needs to now fit in. So who operates in the digital age? Who are the people that you are targeting? A lot of millennials are coming into the organization that is now of working age, already acquired a qualification. They don't want to sit through an assessment that is 3 hours, it's long, it's cumbersome, it's dull, it is boring. Because you know that we have very short attention spans. Unless you make it colorful and interesting and animated, people are going to lose interest. And when you get bored, you're not really motivated to think very well and to give your best performance. So those things will all have to change. The way this tests are set up, and just to make it more sexy. I suppose, for the digital world. So using more engaging approaches, such as game-based assessments, interactive rating format, virtual and augmented reality technology will have to be used to make it worthwhile in the digital world. Psychological assessment tests will enable organizations to better understand peak performance, a much sharper focus on productivity gains, doing more with less. I think you all know that term. And building a work culture of excellence will accelerate the move away from measuring normal ranges of behavior and performance to predicting qualities driving peak performance, such as strength, talents, and motives. So there's a lot of criticism that psychological assessments wants or measures what is normal, but it doesn't measure what is unique, what is special, and what is above average or above normal, which is a very big criticism towards tests at the moment. And by continuing to focus on measuring how a typical person behaves at work and applying competencies to try to standardize behavior across large groups of leaders or employees, we miss an opportunity to fully understand and unlock peak performance, because we take what is a norm group? A norm group is representative of people that is like me. Therefore, my result is being tested against that norm group. But we are so into standardization that the uniqueness and peak performance is missed, because we just want an average of how the person is going to perform going through the assessment. Psychological assessment tests will zoom in on diversity and uniqueness. Because the current trend must be to shift away from pigeonholing personality and ability into broad, oversimplified categories. And here they criticize, extroverts versus introverts, or the MBTI, or the insights profile that tells you you're the sunshine yellow, as an example, and that boxes you in, it pigeonholes you into, you are like this. And this is how we need to understand each other's in teams to a more unique approach in terms of assessing people. And I think one of the points I want to make here, that is in that second last bullet, is that assessments can better account by ensuring employees get 360-degree feedback on how their qualities and behaviors are perceived by co-workers and other stakeholders, including measuring how their strengths and behavior play out in times of rapid change and stress. Because rapid change is the order of the day. Stress is the order of the day. And sometimes an assessment doesn't always bring in that element, but a 360 assessment from a performance management point of view can also give a candidate big insight into their qualities and behaviors on the job. Psychological assessment tests will enable organizations to measure learning agility and grit. Now, I just want to stand still with learning agility. You know that saying that by the time, and I have a first year student, undergraduate student in my home, by the time she is finished with her qualification, the job market would have shifted. And sometimes students preparing for a particular career from a study course perspective, by the time they are finished with their qualification, those jobs don't exist anymore. And that is where learning agility needs to come in, where you need to have the ability to change and change in the minute, because your job has changed and therefore there are new things that you are responsible for, and therefore it requires quite a steep learning curve. But how agile are you in making that jump, the leap from what you knew before you were doing to what is now required in the organization for you to do? And the grit is also important. Businesses increasingly needs agile, energized, and resilient workforces in order for them to be nimble, competitive, and to adapt to increasingly turbulent markets and rapidly changing technologies. Consequently, there will be an increased focus on defining and measuring qualities like learning agility, flexibility, and resilience. People who have been in a job for a very long time is going to find that change very difficult. People who has been in their job for long but are flexible in terms of their personality are not going to have such a terrible time as those that's been there but don't like change, as an example. And resilience, that measure of holding on and holding out and making the necessary changes because you are flexible. Those are the qualities that's going to make you survive when your world at work changes. Grit is a combination of passion for a long-term goal and perseverance. This is also receiving a lot of attention from HR professionals and business psychologists, as it reflects what many businesses need from their people in order to remain focused and highly productive in the face of pressure and uncertainty. And those people who are not able to exhibit that learning agility, the flexibility and the grit required, those are the people that's going to take on most stress. They are going to be highly stressed because their world has been shaken. Their comfort zone is completely shattered. They have to think differently, do differently. So they almost need a whole new skill set. But if you have the flexibility, then you can get on board. How do we use social media, as part of psychological assessment test? And it's quite frightening what social media and the algorithms can say about somebody's behavior, somebody's online behavior, but also in terms of what you post and what you are interested in. Because I'm amazed at the stuff that gets dropped in my feed, and then I know it's because I've clicked on this thing that took me there, and now all of a sudden I'm getting bombarded with more of the same that I was looking for, which in some respect it's lacquer because, okay, it gives you option, but in another respect it's like, oh my gosh, nothing you do is a secret online. And I think that is probably a place that, from an assessment perspective, we have not really ventured into. But the future might, in the coming decade, organizations will make increasing use of data provided on social networking sites such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, to recruit and screen candidates. I mean, in the professional roles, the first place people go to these days to look for a new job is LinkedIn. Where are the days that you had to go buy a newspaper to go find a job? Yes, I've lived that long. Algorithms and tools have already been developed and tested that accurately describe your personality based on your Facebook and other social media activity. Now, which would be a more truer version of yourself? This one where you're in a controlled environment and you know this is based on you getting a job, or that which is taken from your behavior on social media. The ethical and legal implications of using social media digital footprints in this way are already raising concerns amongst candidates, HR, and legal professionals. But I can tell you, those things are going to be ironed out. And that's one of the things we're potentially going to see happening in the future. Ethical considerations arise from the use of web scraping from social media to assess people. There's acts that prohibit us from doing that, but somehow behind the scenes, somewhere, it is still happening. You are all aware of the protection of personal information, the POPI Act, PPI before that, that you have to be very careful how you use and process personal information about clients of yours, test takers, etc. So these are all the future of psychological assessment, but the work that needs to go into it is still massive, in getting this accepted in terms of the legal framework and in terms of what people are comfortable with that you should take. So in conclusion then, many assessments, as we know today, are unlikely to stand the test of time as we move into the new digital age. In order to future-proof their organizations and achieve clear talent outcomes, HR and people leaders should experiment with some of the new tools, ensuring outdated approaches are replaced with scientifically validated, up-to-date approaches that are engaging and also pinpoint people's uniqueness and diverse talents, as well as measuring job-based requirements. So as previously said, we currently like to see how you would typically behave in an environment based on the inherent requirements of the job. But we don't really look at what is unique about you and what other diverse talents you have, even though we are recruiting for a financial management job, as an example. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of my story tonight. Flate. My story is 8. Are there any questions? No questions? Good luck. Wasima, you were not here earlier. I said good luck with the exams. Good luck with the studies. I hope that you are all going to do well. And this is going to be the last time that we meet. So I just hope you everything of the best in your future studies and careers.
Thank you so much. I definitely need the luck. Definitely need the luck. And thank you so much for all the sessions that you've given us. It's been helpful.
You're very welcome.
Yes, I think Candace is quite right. Thank you so much, Natalie. We really appreciate the time you've given us. And
Oh,
yeah,
thank
good
you.
luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Have a good evening, eh?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Okay.
Good
Bye.
night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes.